Thanks, Richard. I'd firstly, as Richard says, Conor King, so I am. I'd like to thank the National Building Control and Market Surveillance for asking me to speak here today on Part M. I'll be just giving an overview of a disability access certificate application process. So just a brief background: as delegated officer on the Building Control Act in June 20, and part of my day-to-day duties is outlined in the Code of Practice. It's 3.6.1 there. The Building Control Authority shall, and what we actually shall and what we should carry out. The process of applications for fire safety cert and disability access cert, which is DACs, and issue decisions of those applications. Validate and register commencement notices, 7-day notices, and accompanying certificate notices of assignment and notices of undertakings. Validate and register the certificate of compliance on completion and accompanying documentation submitted in support of the same, and maintain a public register of building control decisions and activities. That's what we shall do, and also outline what we should be doing as the Building Control Authority is maintain records, including inspections and records of inspections, undertaking a risk analysis of each commencement notice submitted in order to inform its own inspection arrangements, and advise the assigned certifier in relation to uses of compliance relating to the building or works that are disputed by parties to the construction project. So that's basically an outline of what the Building Control Authority does, and as part of that, a DAC is only one small item of what we're actually carrying out. So just give a brief presentation overview. The learning outcomes of what my presentation's about: statistics relating to DACs, especially from Louth County Council, the disability access certificates themselves, request for revised information, DAC compliance reports, personal pet hates, which all building control officers have, non-compliance or compliance examples, and just a small case study at the end of the presentation. So the learning outcomes is basically to provide an overview and understanding of what a DAC is, highlight common areas of non-compliance with DAC applications and what we're receiving day to day. You may ask yourself what a DAC is, and everyone in-house here hopefully knows what a DAC is, but for the ones online, a DAC is a certificate granted by the Building Control Authority, which certifies compliance of the design of certain works, new buildings, except dwellings, extensions, and material alterations to the buildings. Basically, it's the design. By getting the DAC, you don't actually have a building that's complies. The building has to be built then in accordance with what is submitted within the DAC. If the DAC and the drawings and the DAC compliance report doesn't reflect what's on site, but then the certificate's not worth what it's the piece of paper it's wrote on. So reasons for complying with Part M. The main aim for Part M is to ensure that regardless of age, size, disabilities of persons, that new buildings other than dwellings are accessible and usable. That's a given. Works or extensions to existing buildings other than dwellings are, where practical, accessible and usable. Material alterations to existing buildings other than dwellings increased accessibility and usability of existing buildings where practical. And new dwellings are visitable, not flats. So buildings should be designed to cater for the occupants' access and use throughout the design process of the building. The main aim of the building regs is outlined there. It's basically the health and safety and welfare of people in and about buildings, to secure the health and safety and welfare of people in and about buildings. The primary responsibility for compliance, just to remind everyone, is that the requirements of the building regulation rests with the designers, the builders, and the owners of the buildings. As Owen previously mentioned, the Bring Back Homes is also additional documentation that's very useful for an agent or even for the building control officers. So Louth County Council statistics. So Louth is in the Eastern and Midlands region. So its population is approximately just under 140,000 people, with two major towns, Dundalk being in the north and North Louth, and Drogheda being in South Louth. Our number of DACs, as you can see there, they're highlighted out. In 2020, we had 76, 21, 95, 22, 106, which is steadily increasing over the last 3 years. Now this year, so far, we have 35, which seems, I know it's below average, but for the next 2 quarters, we suspect that that's going to rise. Over the last number of years, approximately 285 DACs have assessed and reviewed, or reviewed and assessed. The DAC process itself. So an applicant or an agent submits a DAC. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, the agent or the applicant knows what actually happens in-house. The applicant and agent prepares a DAC and prepares and submits the DAC. They can do it online, process via BCMS, or paper submission. Just note that some local authorities may charge for the paper submission to be uploaded onto BCMS. The building control process has 4 stages after it's submitted. It has the validation or invalidate the DAC, a technical assessment, a recommendation, and finally the decision. So at the validation stage, when we receive a DAC, what we'll be looking out for is that the statutory forms they're checked, that one, they're signed and they're dated. The project particulars are also checked. Nominated roles is checked. The fees are checked, that 1, that they're correct, and 2, that they're actually there. The drawings and the compliance report is also reviewed at that stage. Just that we note, most local authorities would probably have their own filing system for recording DACs and the likes of fire certs. Ourselves, we use Diamond. So anything that's submitted gets added also to the premises file. Taking that all these above are all correct, it's only then that the DAC can be validated. If there's any items up there that's not correct, it's either sent out for further information or it's invalidated. Additional to this, it's for any local authorities out there, we just keep an in-house live register of all DACs coming in. It's very handy if an agent or an applicant rings and wants to know this current status of that DAC. It's very quick at pulling it up. You're able to know exactly where it is, where it's stood, of what status it's currently at. So we're moving on now after the validation stage, and we go to technical assessment. So the drawings and the compliance report are reviewed in line with the TGD, or the technical guidance document M, and part M of 2010 for compliance or relevant guidance provided within the compliance report. It has, from that technical assessment, there's 3 outcomes. It's either request for revised information, recommended for grant with or without conditions, or recommended for refusal. So request for revised information. All notifications are sent out via BCMS. That's the validation photo or revised information on grants, etc. We, Louth County Council, send out a paper copy also of photo or revised information, and we also send out our grants via paper as well. The copy of any further information or revised information or the grants all get filed with the premises file. The applicant and agent can upload any additional information if it's sought via BCMS or email directly into the building control. There's the example there of just our standard letter, say, for further information sent out. Just going to go through a few common requests for further information. The application form is not signed by the correct persons. It's not dated. Description of works doesn't accurately describe the building or works, i.e. they've used the planning description. The incorrect fee was submitted with the DAC. Applied for fee exemption, and one, it's either it's not exempt, or two, there's no exemption form provided. Incorrect drawings uploaded or not provided with the submission. The size and the scale is not marked on the drawings, or the location of the actual site map is not correct. It might seem simple, but occasionally, quite seldom, that's what we're receiving. So yeah. So I'll go through a few common requests for revised information: inconsistency with the compliance report and the company drawings. So example would be a canteen facilities is on the drawing, but yet it's not in the compliance report, or vice versa. It's in the compliance report and there's no actual canteen facilities within the unit or the building. Designated car park spaces is not detailed on the site layout. Key compliance requirements on drawings not fully dimensioned. Door widths, they're not there. Corridor lengths, corridor widths, turning areas, dead ends, WCs, changing facilities not adequately dimensioned. These are all common, and I can put, if I put it out there across the board, I can guarantee every hand will be up from the Building Control Authority that our compliance reports, or the compliance reports received, majority of them is missing some of these. So, Louth County Council, we generally grant DACs without conditions that would affect the layouts of the plans submitted. So if the layout is going to change, we'd grant it without conditions. We'd send it back for further information, because we tend to find that if it's a condition, if a new revised drawing has to be submitted, then that gets circulated across the board of the project. Good practice and ensure that if constructed with the drawings submitted with the DAC, the buildings will be in compliance with the requirements of Part M of the second schedule. Where buildings is not built in accordance with the DAC, a revised DAC application shall be made. So we move on now to the recommendation stage. So following the assessment, any clarification sought by the revised information, only then can the building control officer make the recommendation. 3 outcomes: grant with conditions, but you must provide the reasons of why you're adding the conditions. And then the refusal must also provide a reason of why it's been refused. We go on to the decision stage. The delegated person appointed by the chief executive have the final decision to grant with conditions, or refuse. So as a building control officer, I make the recommendation. Only the chief exec has the final decision with the DAC. The decision is not modified. The decision is notified via BCMS or paper. Note, you must have a DAC to open, occupy, or use any building, and that's the law. A decision on a DAC must be given within 2 months, unless an extension of time is sought between the applicant and the local authority. So we have 2 months to review it. If not, we have to ask for or request an extension of time. Over on the right-hand side, you can see it's just an example of a granted DAC certificate. So I'm going to go through the compliance report that we receive with the drawings, the DAC compliance report should not puzzle you after you read it. You should actually, once you read it, you should nearly look at the drawing and be able to sketch it out yourself and know exactly the layout nearly. The report should follow the sequence of the TGD. The report should not jump from section to section or from clause to clause. It should clearly reference the correct details or diagrams. When you read it, you shouldn't be more confused than the time you open it up. No area should be left out of the report. And if not applicable, state that within the report. It saves us searching, maybe it's at the back, maybe it's at the front, or maybe I've missed it myself. Just state it that it's not applicable. The applicant or agent should review the compliance report and drawings to clearly demonstrate compliance with Part M. So before the applicant submits it or the agent submits it, have a review, have someone else to check it, and don't just submit it and get the Building Control Authority to do the reviewing of it, because it's time, it takes considerable time to go through a DAC, depending on the size of the project. Personal pet hates, I'll go through a few of them, and I know all building control officers have these. The compliance, the title on the compliance report not matching the proposed works. So the first page of the compliance report doesn't even match what is actually submitted. And it might sound silly, but we do get that from time to time, which straight away I know by even opening it that the agent hasn't reviewed it at all. The compliance report referencing other buildings or works. So opening it up, you know that you could actually nearly pick out what the previous building the agent actually carried out a DAC for, because he hasn't changed any of the description or items within the report. The compliance report states that specific areas within the building are only for able-bodied people, which is definitely one of my pet hates, because how does the agent even know that only able-bodied people will be in that area? It's meaningless, really. Meaningless notes or comments. For areas that are not accessible for all, a mobile ramp will be deployed by a member of staff. And I have a picture of just one on the right-hand side. We did get that in on a DAC, that you couldn't access a certain area, but it was stated that the member of staff will pull out a mobile ramp. It's definitely not, wouldn't be in compliance and wouldn't be acceptable. The application must submit to the correct local authority. If not, it's invalid. So now that's pretty simple. So it can happen on border counties. Maybe the agent put it into the wrong local authority, or if it was the city into the county, etc. Also, if you're contacting a local authority, ensure that you have the correct local authority that you're calling to find out what's the status of a DAC. I would strongly advise that consultants should proofread the DAC before submitting it. So proofread the compliance report and review the drawings, and not just do a copy and paste. Go through just a few compliance examples here. This picture is to an apartment block. So it was the owner or the builder just decided to take it upon themselves to change the public footpath. That one came into us through operations, so it did. We were unaware of it. Operations was unaware of it. So just for all consultants, agents, builders, etc., that's maybe viewing online, there is other areas to consider. Plan permission, road opening licenses, traffic management, pedestrian management, services, etc. You can see there's services beside the door, but I don't think this would be too acceptable. So it would, and if every building started to do that, the footpath would pretty much turn out like a Mexican wave. So as I mentioned earlier, the Bringing Back Homes is a good document. So it is a supporting document there, and Appendix 4 highlights the technical additional technical requirements that may be asked. This is another example. We had it was apartment complex was inspected close to the completion stage, very close to the completion stage. The lift openings was in compliance while a signed certifier done his inspections on it, but then the second fixing carpenter came round and put on the skirting boards, which reduced the opening to the lift. And what ended up happening was remedial works needed to be carried out. And the implication onto this would be additional costs to the contract, time delay, no CCC. If it was submitted, it would have been put out for invalid or further information. And it's basically non-compliant. Just go through a quick case study here. It's Ardee Castl. It was built in 15th century. I don't think there would have been too many DACs back then. And it was originally a stronghold to defend off the Pale. In 1850, it was converted over to a courthouse and a prison, and it closed as a courthouse in the 2000s, due to significant safety issues in relation to fire and accessibility. Louth County Council acquired a neighbouring property, which is on the right-hand side there, and it's boarded up. As part of building control, the project leader that was the project leader or engineer asked the building control to go in and carry out an inspection on it and write up just a report to accompany the ministerial consent application, which was submitted in May 23. The proposed accessible extension, you can see it down here on the south side, is fully accessible. So it is. It's a challenging existing building. It's 4 stories with split levels throughout. That's a ground floor plan there. So it is. It has a spiral stairs up here on the north side. There's narrow corridors, which the walls themselves create narrow corridors. As an example, that wall there is at least 2 meters thick, and so is some of these walls, adjoining walls. There's lack of compliant sanitary facilities within it, and challenging door widths, etc. By acquiring the neighbouring property, it is proposed to build a fully accessible extension, proposed to put on a fully accessible extension on the south side. That's kind of a proposed photomontage of the proposed works, as you barely see it here on the front. Currently, it's not in use, but by proposing this extension, it will bring back a 15th century building into circulation and into use for the public and for the locality. I'd just like to thank you for taking your time and for listening. It's just pretty much a quick run through of the DAC process from the building control officer's side and what we actually receive. And hopefully you take, even if you take one item of it there, and if you're an agent out there that's tuned in online, have the DAC application proofread and before submitting, because it is time stakingly, it takes up a considerable amount of time to review it, and we're not there just to review the submitted work. We're there to actually go through it and ensure that it complies. So any questions can be taken during the Q&A session. Thanks a million.